Yeah, done with my Oreo.
Okay, good. Do we really know what happened? The brother did.
The brother, that's what I thought too.
I mean, that seems like kind of obvious. Hey, do you want to talk about death?
Yeah. I mean,
Murdery thingy. Okay, now we're both recording. Okay, cool.
Yay!
Hey, what's up?
Hey guys, thanks for bearing with us.
Sorry, we're a little late.
So
first, welcome to Mystery Murdery Thingy.
I'm Chloe.
I'm Mario. Welcome to Friday.
Jesus Christ.
Friday.
That's where we're at right now.
Right. So let's just real quick, right at the beginning.
Just some tech difficulties.
And I don't need to get into the whole thing, but essentially what happened was we recorded Tuesday night like we usually do. We were going to get the pod out to y'all 12:01 on Wednesday, which I always like to do. Right at 12 on Wednesday. And I got home.
Ideal is recording on Sunday.
Right. We've been trying to record on Sunday.
Sometimes it doesn't happen.
Right. So, but anyway, we were still being responsible. Okay, we did it Tuesday night. I get home. I'm gonna upload it to put it in GarageBand and whatever, and it's just doesn't play.
Yeah.
And then I put it on my computer and it won't open. And then I'm like, why is this file only 9 megabytes? Oh, it's not there. It was completely corrupted. And anyway, now I've told you the whole story. So I was very, very frustrated.
After like an hour.
I'd spent, about an hour trying to make it work, and it just was not there. So, hey.
Here we are.
What we said then will remain a mystery.
Ooh.
There's a mystery.
That's a good way to put it.
Another mystery.
The lost tapes.
The
lost
files of Mystery Murdery Thingy.
Right.
We're doing it again. Take two.
What are we talking about this week, Mario Silva?
I'm talking about part 2 of the Antikythera mechanism. Yes.
There's so much to it.
Don't you love ancient computers?
And I'm talking about what I'm going to talk about. You'll find out.
Right. I already know because I heard the whole thing before. Okay, anyway.
No, you didn't. No.
Let's just jump right into it. Okay, so part 2, Antikythera mechanism. Just going to run right back in here with a meanwhile.
Meanwhile?
You should probably listen to the last episode if you...
go back, do a little rewind.
Right.
We're talking about basically an ancient computer.
Exactly. So, just gonna jump back right back into it. So, meanwhile, in London in 1983, which is the same year that Derek Price died, who, if you'll recall, is the one who did a lot of the kind of early investigation into the device, starting in the late 50s until his death in 1983.
One of the many people who dedicated his life. Right?
Exactly. Kind of the pioneer of that. So, in London in 1983, a Lebanese man walks into the Science Museum on Exhibition Road, and he's got this little weird thing with him, and he says, "Hey, I have an ancient geared mechanism that I bought in a market in Beirut, Lebanon, several weeks ago. Do you want to see it?"
I just found it.
And it appeared to me. And the really weird thing about this...
Y'all want to see it?
Right, is that it actually ended up being real. And genuine, and being identified as the second oldest geared mechanism ever discovered, behind the Antikythera mechanism. Yeah. It really sparked the interest of the curator Michael Wright, and he started to get really into these ancient machines. And what Wright eventually did was made a reconstruction of the little geared mechanism. It was like a sundial, actually a lot simpler than the Antikythera mechanism, weirdly, and dated it to about the 6th century CE. So about 700 years or so after the Antikythera mechanism was created. And this, kind of investigation and his, kind of getting really, really into these things naturally led him to the Antikythera mechanism. So he kind of turned his studies to that. And just like Price, got really, really into it. And he actually went back and looked at all of the stuff that Price had did before, the reconstruction that he did, all of his theories about how it worked and all that, and found some errors.
Okay.
Okay. So... kind of a reevaluation now of what the Antikythera mechanism exactly, how it did work.
And this is the 80s now?
Right. This is starting in like 1983, mid 80s or so. And Wright really approached the project as an engineering task. So, he really wanted to make like a working model of the Antikythera mechanism that worked in the way that it worked then, right? Which is, it's really hard to say. I mean, that's kind of one of the central mysteries here, right? What exactly did this thing look like, and what exactly did it do? And Michael Wright was kind of well-positioned to look into this because he had a really deep well of knowledge about gear train design and especially about timepieces. This guy was like weirdly obsessed with clocks.
Oh, so he wasn't like an engineer or something?
No, he was an engineer. He had a hobby, like interest in clocks as well.
It's kind of cool.
His whole house was filled with like cuckoo clocks that would
so he wasn't like having like walking around with like Gucci watches and shit.
No. It was more like, like your weird grandma who's like a cat lady and's got a bunch of clocks in their house. But he was, a curator of a museum with a bunch of clocks in his house. So he also realized, Wright realized that in order to really understand this machine, that a new set of X-rays was going to need to be done. So in 1990, he works actually with a collaborator, which is weird for Wright. He's kind of a misanthrope, kind of a homebody. He doesn't work well with others. Okay, so
I was going to say like you, but you do work well with others. You're just a homebody.
I'm a homebody.
That's what I meant. When you said homebody, I was like, oh.
Like me.
Like both of us.
Right. So unfortunately, Michael Wright, he probably should have just stuck with the working alone in this instance, because the guy he picked to work with, Alan Bromley, ended up being kind of a dick.
Yikes.
So, yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to speak ill of the dead. We'll get to that, but yeah,
I think you can speak
great.
However you want of the dead because they're dead.
That's true. They don't know, right? Maybe
they do know.
Ooh, ghosty.
Ghosty.
So maybe Alan Bromley's ghost is looking down with displeasure on me at this very moment.
Yeah, on us specifically.
Right?
Sure.
So, Alan, if you're listening, just going to tell you a few facts about you already know about yourself. He was a lecturer in computer science, really, really super smart guy. And he, and Wright did these X-rays together, right? 1990. Wright thought they were doing it together, but once the X-rays were actually done, Wright said, or Bromley said, yeah, I don't think you're going to get that information, Michael Wright. You're not going to actually get access to the X-rays because I'm going to be the one who's going to make the big discovery. So it turned into a pissing contest, basically. And Alan Bromley had the goods, right?
I want to do it.
He wasn't giving them away. So, this whole thing, that wanting to be the one to make the big discovery, it's kind of a recurrent theme in this investigation. And you can see me rolling my eyes. Y'all can't see me rolling my eyes. Chloe can see me rolling my eyes here. So almost 10 years later, so now we're about the year 2000. The year 2000. I remember those spots on Conan when he used to talk about the year 2000 like it was some weird date in the future. My God, that's
how I feel about
20 years ago almost.
That's how I feel about 2020. Like 2020 is like so future.
Oh, it's so crazy. God, I remember he kept doing that bit after the year 2000 too, which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, getting off on a tangent. So anyway, we're the year 2000, and Michael Wright's obsession with the mechanism. It's not only this bad experience with Alan Bromley, but also may have contributed to his divorce.
Oh,
damn. The sort of tragedy continues when Alan Bromley ends up on his deathbed of cancer in Sydney, Australia.
The mechanism more than he loved his wife.
That's what it may have been. Yes, allegedly, perhaps.
Yikes.
So Alan Bromley, on his deathbed, finally gives Michael Wright much of the X-ray data that he had denied him previously. And after all of this, right, after all this heartache, all this suffering, Michael Wright was especially dismayed to know that new X-rays were about to be done.
So his X-rays are like old and useless and
obsolete.
He'd been fighting for them for so long, and now
his thunder had been stolen. Yes. So poor Michael Wright. And of course, the scanning technology, by the time we're getting to this point, a few years later, has greatly improved since Wright's X-rays were done. So they truly were obsolete. So with these new X-rays, though, they could see inside of the mangled pieces of the Antikythera mechanism to see really how it was constructed and give us a pretty good idea of probably how it worked.
Okay. So before, could they see layers?
They could see them, but they couldn't tease them apart, right? With this new technology, which was called computer tomography 3D X-ray scanning.
Bless you.
You're welcome. So what that technology, really allowed them to do was to tease apart the different layers. Okay. It allowed them to create a true 3D image of what was going on.
Okay.
Right? So, and this technology, just so you understand, was actually not developed for this purpose at all. It was actually developed for better aviation safety testing. But it was tweaked by the researchers to use it to explore the mechanism. And when the researchers called the company that makes these X-ray machines to do this, they were kind of hesitant. They didn't know if the X-ray people were going to be into it. This is not their sort of wheelhouse, right? They were totally up for it. They were super into it. They were like, wait, you have what? And they made an X-ray machine like specifically for investigating the Antikythera mechanism.
Oh, wow.
And not only did they do that, but because the Antikythera mechanism is so fragile and cannot be moved, more than within the museum it's housed in, they actually took the whole huge X-ray machine to Athens and set it up there.
Okay, how huge is huge?
The size of this room.
Wow.
Which, if you're not here in this room, is what, 10 by 12?
Sure.
About 10 by 12. So, pretty fucking big, I would say, to use a technical term. And
yes, the scientific term.
Right, to use my scientific terms. So the first pictures were, according to one researcher, quote, so much better than we dared to hope.
Wow.
And that they, quote, took your breath away. So I know it's hard to, this X-ray as opposed to that X-ray, but I think that gives you a little bit of an idea of why this was different this time.
Yeah.
The people who were in the know were super impressed. Yeah. And this was really a watershed moment for them. And the more thorough imaging of the Antikythera mechanism really revealed that Wright and Price were essentially correct in their theories about how the mechanism worked. For example, Price had predicted that one of the gears was based on a 235 lunar month cycle. So he predicted that it would have 235 gears, right? The little triangles.
Oh my God.
To account for that. And there's an inscription on that gear that literally reads 235 divisions on the spiral. So we know that he was exactly correct. And again, if you're wondering, why didn't you just count up the gears? A lot of them are broken and missing.
Okay.
So there's guesswork that has to be done as well, and extrapolation. And in addition to that, Wright had predicted that there would be a little revolving sphere representing, the sun or the moon, and another description read, quote, on the extremity of the pointer stands a little golden sphere, close quote.
So would that be the sun?
That would be the sun, exactly. So, these things were actually represented graphically with pieces of metal.
Among other things?
Yes, it's sort of a predictive calendar, you could say. It shows you when eclipses are coming up, the movements of celestial bodies across the sky, including nonlinear movements. So it was quite sophisticated. So, yes, it was a calendar, but also, it had a lot of depth to it as well. And further analysis of those better X-rays revealed that there was actually an explanatory text, and this is just nuts to me, of more than 3,500 words serving as a detailed catalog and explanation of the Antikythera mechanism.
So it had a how-to?
It sort of had a how-to, yeah. It was like, this was here, and, it did this, and this was here, and it did this.
Why can't, all ancient discoveries have a little, blurb that says, here's what this is and why?
In
and
perfectly
how.
etched little letters that you can actually read,
there
even
would
after
be
they've been crushed for 2,000 years.
Questions out there.
There would be. I mean, I wish the library at Alexandria hadn't burned down.
That
would have
been 5
been,
times.
That would have been nice. Yeah, 5 times and to the ground, a few times. So, if you recall, we're gonna jump back in to the story of our friend Xenophon Mousas.
I don't recall.
Okay, the last time,
honest,
sure. The last time we met Xenophon, he was a little boy, just a little tiny boy, looking through the glass at the Antikythera mechanism and just fascinated.
This
by
was
it.
the beginning of his movie, right? I remember, because that's how I pictured it.
Right, exactly. And in the interim, he grew up to be one of the, Antikythera mechanism researchers. And he told the New Yorker that, in reference to the explanatory text, it was as if, quote, we had discovered the user's manual right inside the machine, close quote.
Right. That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. So Mousas and other researchers also realized that the writing preserved in the metal and in etching represented an almost unique record of ancient astronomical writing, almost all of which is not extant. So
what does that mean?
Not present anymore. It was lost long ago.
Oh, wow.
So it's interesting because not only because it's a how-to manual for the Antikythera mechanism and this whole notion of an ancient computer and geared mechanism and all of that, but also it furthers our understanding of what the ancients knew and understood about how astronomy worked. So it's even, it's kind of like a double miracle.
So is it more than we thought?
I don't know if it's necessarily more than we thought. No, not necessarily, but I think it just, and I don't really know enough to say for sure, but I think it's more that it just kind of enriches our understanding and confirms things that maybe we had suspected before.
Okay.
But it's just crazy that we actually have this, after all these years. And Xenophon Mousas also remembers that this period, after the X-rays were taken, was an intense period of examination and interpretation, leading up to about 2006, when they were actually able to make some, more definitive statements about what was revealed in those X-rays. And he actually remembers this as, quote, the most interesting time in my life, close quote. So, yeah, that would be part of the movie too. Right. That would probably be what do you call it? When you got all the different times you're going
montage.
It would be a montage. Yes, exactly. There'd be a montage sequence. They're looking at the plates or the computer screens or whatever.
He's narrating in the back this was the most interesting time of my life.
Exactly. And that he really felt like it connected him with his ancient astronomical colleagues. As he put it, in a very moving way to him. This kind of visceral, tactile connection to these people that lived, 2,500 years ago.
But in the end, they were all interested in the same thing, right?
Exactly, because
when
people
it comes
don't
down
change.
To it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People now are the same as they were well before 2,000 years ago. So let's kind of pause at this point, take stock of what we know and what is still a mystery. Okay, so what we do know is that this thing, the Antikythera mechanism, was a geared machine of some great complexity. It was almost certainly used to display the movement of the sun and the moon, and also probably the planets as well. The 4 or 5, I forget, that they knew about at that time. One of the big mysteries, though, is why. Why did they make this thing? Because it wasn't really necessary to do the calculations that, to do these extrapolations. They could just kind of do it through abstract calculation instead of geared mechanisms.
So in that way, it was not easier? It wasn't a type of innovative thing that made these calculations quicker and easier, like a calculator?
Sort of, but it wasn't widely available enough to have that much of an impact. I mean, this thing was an oddity. It probably wasn't unique. There were almost certainly more than one, but, it wasn't like an abacus, or an astrolabe, where they were just everywhere. It was too hard to make and too complex to design for it to be really practical in terms of like really furthering like the mainstream understanding of how these things work. So yes and no. But it really just doesn't appear that it was used that way, even if it was possible to, because it wasn't mass produced, like I said, like the Astrolabe. So we don't really have, examples of a lot of people using it to make predictions. It just kind of seems like it was more of a fascination, even a toy in a way. I mean, people feel strongly, I think, one way or the other about calling it that and whether that kind of demeans it in a way. But I guess I'm just trying to think of how did they think about it, not putting our kind of stamp on it or understanding, but what was their understanding of it from their perspective, which is really hard to say.
What if it was more of a learning tool than anything?
It could have been, because there are theories that it came out of one of the kind of great, centers of learning in the ancient world. So
well, you said it
maybe.
was found on a ship full of treasure, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're not sure where that ship was going or whose ship it was necessarily. But, I think that it really maybe was something a little more like magical or spiritual to the Greeks. That,
okay.
The notion that one could hold the motions of the heavens in your hands, that you could actually turn a crank, right, and see information that then you also saw played out in the sky, meant that in some ways you controlled it.
So it could have also been like a religious symbol, maybe?
I think so. I mean, I'm not sure that there's necessarily support for that in the record, but I don't know that there would be.
What if like only like monks and stuff had it? And they were like, look, friends, here's what our mechanism is saying about the skies today.
Well, yeah, I mean, this thing would have been the ultimate status symbol. The person or people who owned it, I mean, it would have been almost inconceivable to most people. I mean, it would be almost inconceivable to most people today that someone would have had that 2,500 years ago. Imagine if you were a person 2,500 years ago.
I can't imagine.
Neither can I, and that's why I think this question it will almost almost certainly will always remain a mystery, because it's really not possible for us to cast our mind back or understand the ancient culture well enough to really understand why they would have made this thing.
It's interesting that like we have this little like user manual on it, but we don't. There's still so many questions like surrounding it.
Right, because the user manual says absolutely nothing about why it was made. It really doesn't even say the purpose for which it was made. It just says, this thing is here and this is what it does. Okay. But only sort of self-referentially.
Okay.
So it is sort of a user's manual, but also it's really not a user's manual.
It would be read in assumption that the person reading it already knew the answers that we're looking for. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. It's not telling you how it works, really, or like how to fix it. Certainly.
Yeah.
My God. Yeah, I can't imagine if you were the owner of it and you had no idea, and then it stopped working, like a computer, right?
Oh God.
Like a fucking computer. So
nightmare.
Anyway, yeah, but
nightmare.
Yeah, I think it's even though we'll never really know, it's pretty cool to think about this stuff and what it kind of could have meant in that ancient context. But essentially, we know that it was an ancient analog computer. And I'll unpack that term a little bit, analog computer. So what an analog computer is a model of a physical phenomena that essentially does the same thing but in a much more limited way. Okay? So it can actually be a lot more powerful at certain limited tasks than a digital computer, which is, of course, a multi-purpose computer. An analog computer can do one thing, so it's pretty limited, but it can do really that one thing really well. Okay. Exactly. So the Antikythera mechanism could rightly be called an analog computer because it took simple inputs, right, the date that you would put in, and gave out complex outputs through a series of calculations. And in this case, the mechanism did those calculations with the ratios of the gears. So essentially, one gear in a drivetrain would turn at a certain rate, which would cause another gear to turn at a certain rate, and the ratio between those rates is actually a mathematical calculation itself, right? Because you're kind of turning one number into another number. The numbers being the number of gears on the number of little, whatever, carrots teeth? Or teeth. That's the word I'm looking for. Teeth. I don't know. Teeth.
Carrots.
On a carrot on the the keyboard carrot, not like a carrot you eat.
Carrot.
Anyway, the miniaturization and complexity of the gears and the drivetrains is really striking. I mean, this is one of the weirdest things about this, right? For an ancient machine. We did not, before this was discovered, think that it was possible to create something of this precision in the ancient world. We thought that these kind of things really weren't able to exist until about the 14th century.
So what? It's prochronistic?
Prochronistic. Prochronistic, yes. That's our word for the 2 weeks is prochronistic. And it did have about 30 to maybe as many as 50 or more precision gears within it. And of course, we're just not sure because there are so many pieces of it that are missing.
Right.
And this complexity is even more impressive considering that it was almost certainly all done by hand tools. They didn't have machines that could do these things back then, right? They had to do all of this by hand. So it's just the craftsmanship with which this thing was made is a wonder in and of itself, and kind of a mystery in and of itself.
So it makes sense that I guess it wouldn't be mass produced.
Exactly. It wouldn't have been able to be mass produced. But it also probably would have taken a team of artisans to do it, which is part of why people think there was more than one. Because it just seems odd or kind of inconceivable that they would have gone to all that trouble just to make one. So the handmade gears were put together in what's called an epicyclic gearing system. And that type of system was not known to exist until about 1,500 years after the Antikythera mechanism was sunk. So in the way in which it was put together, on a larger scale, as well as how it was constructed on a small scale, both of those would appear to be prochronistic. So it's prochronistic on more than one level.
So what's anachronistic?
That is simply the inverse, something that's out of time but is old-timey, right? So like the Amish. The Amish are anachronistic, right?
That's funny.
Yeah, so that's what that word means.
Well, I mean, I'm just bringing it up because it means I've been using that word wrong.
Me too. And I don't know, maybe it can mean both. I'm not really sure. But anyway, the Antikythera mechanism also seems to have had this is really cool to me, a little sphere painted half white and half black. So it would actually show graphically the phases of the moon. Ooh. Yeah, and that's part of why I think this was such maybe a spiritual thing to them, because you see, okay, I see here it's half and half. Okay, so I'm going to wait. I'm going to stay up late tonight. I'm going to see, is it really half and half? And then you see like, oh, it really is. Or it's like really full, or it's really, having an eclipse right now.
That makes sense.
So it must have been so cool to those people to be able to do it. I almost wish I could have lived in that time and be that person. You know what I mean? But also not, because I like having, like soap.
You love your iPhone, don't you?
iPhones and all the other things we get to have nowadays. So that's pretty cool. Right, glasses, exactly. Yeah, this was before glasses, by the way. Yeah, for sure. The other cool thing about it was that it also showed the dates of ancient athletic competitions, which is kind of cool. So I read that too.
Weird.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of random. Maybe they were more. Maybe it was a bigger deal then.
I think they were a pretty big deal then. That was kind of minor, more than I had thought before, for
like
sure.
Theater. Remember when theater was a big deal?
This was also that time. So we do know quite a bit, right, as we've been talking about the Antikythera mechanism, but there are also a lot of things that remain mysterious. So let's kind of then run through
the questions.
Right, the remaining mysteries, the questions. Was this shipwreck of a Greek ship engaged in commerce or a Roman ship that had been plundered and was heading back to Rome with the plunder? We don't know. Why exactly did the shipwreck occur? Of course, we'll never really know that, but a lot of people have speculated that the amount of cargo, just the sheer weight and heft of the treasure was too much, and that contributed to the sinking. We also don't really know whether the planets were represented. That remains kind of an active debate, but it appears very, very possible, even probable. And it was definitely within the grasp of the makers to do that. And while those specific gears are not present, we know that there are gears that are not present. Yeah. We know there are missing gears. And presumably they would be among those. And there's also a large gear that seems to be missing that would probably be tied to one or two of the planet's cycles. And there also seems to be references to a planetary indicator in the inscriptions. This is really cool, too, I think. The planetary display may have actually represented the planets with various, metals and minerals. So, gold for the sun, lapis lazuli for Earth, the red onyx for Mars.
Oh, wow.
So that seems pretty cool, too.
So it was, colorful.
Yeah.
Or it could have been.
Right. I like to think that it was. And I think the biggest mystery about this thing, other than its very existence, is who exactly made it? When did they make it? Where did they make it? How did this thing come about?
Whose idea was this?
Yeah, who could have come up with this thing? So, one idea is that it was this guy named Hipparchus, who's known as one of the great astronomers of ancient Greece. He's also thought to have been the one who invented trigonometry. So, clearly a very skilled mathematician would have probably had the technical know-how, to calculate out the ratios and things of that nature.
Yeah, ruined my junior year of high school, didn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
What a dick. The device also may have been tied to Archimedes of Syracuse. And this is probably the one that has the most backing to it, at least as far as I could tell. So the device may have been referenced, actually, or something at least very much like it, in a text that's ascribed to Cicero. And Cicero describes this thing that sounds a whole hell of a lot like the Antikythera mechanism and ties it to Archimedes.
Okay. In his writings?
In that writing, yes, exactly. And Archimedes is also said to have written, a now lost manuscript called On Sphere Making, detailing the making of complex geared devices. So we know he was into stuff like this. This very much would have been within his wheelhouse.
They have a lost. What if it was found?
And it could be. I mean, that's not unprecedented. I don't know.
We found it.
That would be cool. Let's go look in the in the attic.
Let's look in the attic.
In the basement too. Let's go dig up some ground and see what we find. He certainly, though, Archimedes, would definitely have been capable of this. He's known for inventing the first odometer for measuring distances.
Okay.
So it looked kind of like a push cart. And used gearing to accurately...
That's so cute.
Calculate out a mile or whatever. So it was pretty cool, yeah. And this actually allowed the Romans to create some of their great roads, including the Via Appia, which is, of course, the most famous one. However, there are some signs that it may not have been connected to Syracuse. So maybe it wasn't Archimedes directly. It could possibly, though, have been connected to an academy, and this is what I was kind of referencing earlier, founded by this guy named Posidonius. And Posidonius, he was, a great astronomer, a great mechanical engineer. He was connected to Rhodes, and it does seem that he would have been capable of doing something like this, perhaps, of the candidates, who would have been back then. And furthermore, the theory for the motion of the moon used by the mechanism's constructor matches exactly Hipparchus's theory. So that actually gives more credence to Hipparchus.
Okay.
There's some countervailing indications, about who made it, but it's pretty neat. I won't get into the whole thing because it's kind of complicated. But the Antikythera mechanism essentially probably took into account the variable speed of the moon as it went around the Earth. And
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I know. Neither did I. But the whoever made the device did, even 2,500 years ago. And this matches up really well with Hipparchus's theories. So that kind of gives credence to him. So, the full story of the Antikythera mechanism we'll never really know. But I think it's super fascinating. And
what a weird little object.
Yeah, and it just points to this whole tradition of advanced ancient mechanical engineering that, we just don't know about, right? And, there's obviously a lot more to find out, so that's pretty exciting. And the last thing I just wanted to end on, look up the picture. Andy Carroll, a hobbyist, in 2010, built a fully functioning Lego version. Pretty cool. Pretty cool for a nerd like me.
For a nerd like me.
Right.
That's a great musical.
A nerd like me.
I don't know. I'm making it up. That's what I'm saying. It sounds like a musical. Yeah,
exactly. It does. I'm going to be in a musical.
Yay!
Just got doing theater again after a year.
God bless.
I know. It's going to be
blessing.
Good. If you're in the Bloomington Normal area, look at communityplayers.org for details. Pushing the show. That's what they told me to do. So that's what I'm doing.
So many high fives.
And then I'm going to put the pod into the program in my bio. So cross tabs. That's right. Okay.
So many high fives.
Okay, now you go because it's my turn. I have to get to that rehearsal.
We do.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
So I wanted to talk about pseudoscience and forensic and stuff like that for like a while. So let's just get into it. I'm talking about some cold cases and some pseudoscience, junk science, and cold cases that are cold because of it.
Right. And don't watch Forensic Files.
Don't watch Forensic Files.
Or if you do, don't believe it.
Take it with a grain of salt. And it's sad, and I think a lot of people aren't aware of how rough forensic science really is.
Right.
And there are two really important questions that should be considered when you're looking at forensic science and how it interacts with criminal law. So, is it founded on reliable scientific methodology? Can you accurately analyze the evidence, and can you actually report findings? That's the big thing here. If you have multiple people doing the same process, you should be able to have the same exact results.
Right.
It shouldn't be interpretive or anything like that. That begs the question, how much do the analysts rely on human interpretation? The more that humans are involved and the more that we have to look at it ourselves, the less accurate that it ends up being. It can be tainted by error, and there's bias. There's the absence of sound, actual procedures.
You can do the drugs you're supposed to test. That came up. I don't know if, Kamala Harris recently announced, that she was running for president. There was a controversy when she was the Attorney General of California where...
Yeah, there was a lot of controversies surrounding Kamala Harris. But that's another conversation for another day.
So anyway, there was a forensic tester that was doing exactly what I just said. And all of her cases had to be reviewed. Now, I heard Kamala Harris talking about this, and what she says, just to address this, one particular one, the forensic testing lab was run by the police, not by the Attorney General's office. So she didn't have direct oversight.
Big thing. That's a big problem.
Of course, her attorneys did rely on the evidence, and should they have known that this taint was there? Perhaps. But she didn't have direct oversight. And she actually made the decision to automatically review and dismiss those cases, which she didn't have to do. She wasn't obliged to do that. So, yes, that particularly controversy sounds bad for her, but I actually feel like she answered it pretty well. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
that's important.
Not to, get off on too political a sidetrack, but it's sort of a political topic.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about hair. I'm going to start with hair analysis, and then I'll talk about a case that goes with hair analysis. So the problem with hair analysis is the human interpretation and the microscopic hair analysis. So in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences published a report called "Strengthening Forensic Science in the United States: A Path Forward." Mm-hmm. I could have read it, but I didn't.
It's long.
$60, not what I wanted to pay. And I actually found a lot of great sources that gave me a great summary and put it in basic words for me.
There's a lot of really, really good journalism out about that, and of course the FBI report based on it.
For sure. So it noted that there is no scientifically accepted statistics about the frequency of particular characteristics of hair distributed within the population. So you can't look at one hair and look at another and, positively identify it to one person and having, 1 in 10 million chance. It's just not a thing. It's not real.
It doesn't make any sense.
You can't match up two pieces of hair. So the theory is that an individual's hair has distinguishable features, but that's not true. It's subjective. It's mostly guesswork, and the same technique can be used by different analysis, but it can still produce different results, and that's a big thing, and that's with a lot of these. So today, scientists use what's called short tandem repeat STR DNA testing, which you can use as long as the hair sample contains a root, which is very possible when it comes to violent crimes and stuff like that.
Hair follicles do not contain DNA.
Right. A hair without a root, however, requires mitochondrial DNA testing. So it's reliable, but it's still limited because all of the siblings from the same mother have that same mitochondrial DNA, but it's still better than guesswork and comparing microscopic examples and stuff like that. So let's talk about Sante Tribble. He served 23 years in prison and then did an additional 5 years for parole for a murder that he didn't do. So this happened July 26th, 1978. A 63-year-old white man named John McCormick was robbed, and he was shot with a .32 caliber handgun on the front porch of his home. His wife was home. She woke up. She heard her husband pleading for his life, and she calls 911, but it was too late. So a canine officer and his dog found a stocking mask that the wife said the assailant was wearing at the scene of the crime. So earlier that month, another elderly white man named William Horn had been shot and killed in an armed robbery. There was a similar MO, and the police actually think that the same person did both. So Sante Tribble, he was a kid. He was only 17 at the time. He was linked to the crime by an informant named Bobby Jean Phillips. And so she had some inconsistencies in her statement. Her testimony linked him and his friend Cleveland Wright to a gun similar to the one allegedly used in the crimes, but the actual gun itself was never recovered. So this is already not off to a great start. So the second informant, Ronald Willis, said that Tribble admitted to involvement in the Horn murder, but that's also not true. He was Tribble ended up being tried for both murders, and he was acquitted of the Horn murder due to lack of evidence. So he goes to trial for the first victim, John McCormick. He even presents evidence of a solid alibi that he was at his mom's home in Maryland. Witnesses come up and testify to this alibi. They confirm it and everything, but it really doesn't do anything for him because an FBI analyst comes in and testifies that one of the hairs on the stocking mask links Tribble to the crime. And he said it, quote, matched in all microscopic characteristics, which it's not a thing.
Right. And I think if I were a juror, I would be immediately skeptical of, because I don't do any two pieces of anything match in all microscopic characteristics? Like, what does that even mean? It's like just not a meaningful statement. But when it's an FBI investigator who's saying it,
it's damning.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about this, that forensic evidence, forensic science, it's always so damning when it comes to the jury.
Because there's not that ability, like you were saying at the outset, to discern what is good science and what isn't good science.
Right.
We just don't have that capacity in our society, really.
Right. And he makes up this statistic. He says 1 chance in 10 million that the hair could have belonged to anyone other than Tribble, which is totally exaggerated and invented.
Or who knows? I mean, it's not based on anything, so...
So in 1980, he was convicted of the McCormick murder by a jury, and he was sentenced to 20 years to life. He wasn't released on parole until 2003, and then I got a lot of my information from the Innocence Project. I used the innocenceproject.org, and then I used the California Innocence Project website. Had a lot of great information on their cases, but also why forensics is a problem, and the details on hair analysis and all kinds of stuff. They got involved, and his attorneys ended up getting mitochondrial DNA testing, and it totally excluded him. Nothing implicated him at all. And in the end, the analysis, this second analysis, revealed that the FBI person mistook a dog hair for a human hair. So it wasn't even a human hair.
Not the first time I've heard about that happening.
It's just messed up.
Yeah.
So he was exonerated. He was granted, in December of 2012, he was granted a certificate of innocence.
Which is a thing.
Yep. And the murders of John McCormick and William Horne are still unsolved. Next on my list is bite mark analysis. Now, I think bite mark analysis is probably the most ridiculous out of all of them. There's just not a lot of research to back it up. There's no scientific validation. There's nothing that says that a person's teeth or bite mark is unique, like in the same way that DNA is to like each individual. There's a lot of problems with it. Sometimes a bite mark can actually be some kind of other unrelated injury. It's not like a dental impression at the doctor's office.
Right.
Bite marks are found on skin. They're found on clothing. They're found on soft tissue. Skin, it heals. It can deform the mark totally. It could be something. It couldn't even be a bite mark. It could be some other type of laceration, some type of bruise. And another problem is that it's used. It's often compared using just photos, which allows for mistakes. So like hair analysis, it's the human interpretation, it's the comparison. That's the problem.
And what that allows for, unfortunately, is what we talked about in the Jean Monnet case, right? Where you've got an investigator, right, whether it's the DA or a police officer or whomever, family member of the victim perhaps, who want a certain outcome. And the people who are doing the analysis know that they want that certain outcome.
Right. And they're trying to match their idea to the evidence when it should be the opposite.
Exactly, because good science goes from evidence to conclusion. Bad science goes from conclusion to evidence. Now, that's not only for science, that's just life in general.
Yeah.
But especially when you're talking about science. So if...
And matching it to criminal law. It's a bad combination. It's just a bad
combo. So if you ever hear someone start to talk in that way, where they're going from conclusion to evidence, just know in your head, they're probably wrong.
Yeah. So
and
let's
you can
talk
feel
about
superior.
Gerard Richardson, another man, served 18 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Now, this one's pretty brutal, and it's sad because it's still unsolved. And it's sad because a woman named Monica Reyes, she was the victim. She had to go through this. Her family had to go through this. Gerard Richardson had to spend 18 years in prison for this. His family had to miss him for 8. It's terrible. It's all terrible. So she leaves her home in Elizabeth, New Jersey, around 11 o'clock on the night of February 20th, 1994. So she tells her brother that she's leaving to go see a man who she believed had money for her. So Monica was not in the best of situations. She was a heroin addict. She was breaking into cars at the time. She sold drugs. She posed as a sex worker. She robbed people. She was not in a great situation. 5 days later, her body was found in a ditch 30 miles from her home. The lower portion of her body was covered in half an inch of snow. Like huge rocks, 25 to 100 pounds, were found on her head and her feet. She was wearing the same clothes that she was wearing when she left her house. And this was 5 days ago. She'd been beaten, she'd been strangled, and she'd been robbed. So the ME, the medical examiner, found evidence of possible sexual assault. So a kit was collected. There was a prominent bite mark on the lower left side of her back. And this is what got Gerard, among other things. A lot of these cases that I found have a lot of botched evidence, but the bite mark was what really sent him in. Mm-hmm. It was determined to be fresh, made within hours of the victim's death, and they swabbed it to recover saliva. So the boyfriend, his name is Eli Torres, he told police that he believed that she was killed by some guy who they robbed him, and he was threatening them with a gun. So that's who the boyfriend thinks killed her. Gerard Richardson became a suspect because there was a few times where he sold Monica Ray's cocaine. She also owed him money for the drugs, and they also had some kind of run-in. She promised to pay him once she got her check on the first of the month. So there were a lot of suspects in this case, but Richardson's dental impressions were the only ones that actually ended up being submitted for comparison on the bite mark. Forensic dentist Dr. Ira Tatunik declared that the dental impressions were, in fact, in air quotes, a match.
In his opinion.
In his opinion.
In his expert opinion.
It's just bad.
Right.
So and that's when Richardson was charged with the murder. So he was convicted by a jury November 30th, 1995, and he was sentenced to 30 years without the possibility of parole. So this whole time, Richardson was somebody who maintained his innocence. And even at his sentencing, he said he does admit to supplying drugs to her, but he says, quote, "I didn't kill Monica Reyes, and I'm never going to admit to something that I didn't do." 5 years later, in 2000, he sought DNA testing for the swab from the bite mark, but his petition was dismissed. A year later, his lawyer put in for a petition, and this time it was granted. So they sent it in for testing, and it yielded inconclusive results. More testing was conducted a few years later, and it turned up just her DNA profile. So this is when the Innocence Project becomes involved in Richardson's case. They don't get involved until July of 2012, and they were like, let's do a complete DNA reinvestigation. Let's just start over. So in 2013, YSDR testing on the bite mark swab produced a complete profile that totally excluded Richardson. He was also excluded from the vaginal swab sticks and also fingernail clippings. So they redid this DNA test, and it was exonerated him completely. So he was released in 2013 in October, and he was fully exonerated about a month later. But the murder of Monica Reyes is still unsolved. Now, I'm going to talk about probably the most frustrating of all. This one's not necessary. It is a little bit of science, but let's talk about eyewitness testimony.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredibly frustrating. It's not reliable at all, and it's frustrating because it's like there's somebody out there that saw something and saw the truth and knows but can't explain it to you and can't accurately recall because the human mind doesn't. We're not video recorders. That's not how it works.
Right.
So when you're subject to high stress, high anxiety, your emotions are totally going to change what you're feeling and what you're thinking.
High anxiety.
Me, all the time.
You and Mel Brooks.
Who?
There's a Mel Brooks movie called High Anxiety.
I mean, I know who Mel Brooks is.
Anxiety.
Is that what he does?
He sings the song in this show.
There's a song?
It's good. It's called High Anxiety.
Well,
the song is also called High Anxiety.
Sounds like my anthem.
You
That's
should
what
watch
it fucking sounds like.
Oh.
Okay. So
I was just gonna say one other thing. I think one of the reasons why this one is so frustrating too is because this was the way crimes were solved
for long.
Like the entirety of our common law history of common law, up until like, I don't know, now maybe
it's still happening,
or like in the future perhaps. But what we've found out, and I know you're going to get into this, is that it's just not reliable at all.
Right.
And it should be. Like it should be, but it's just not.
Yeah.
It's
like a cruel joke.
I know. And like we all think if we were in that situation, like we would know, right? Like I know what color that guy's shirt was. But do they know, Chloe?
No.
Okay.
So even if the event just happens, your emotions and your adrenaline can totally alter your memory. Like I said, we don't have the capability to record memories like a video recorder. And I learned this, fun fact, witnesses often focus on weapons.
Right.
And not on the identity of the perp.
Makes sense.
Because if you're in a fight or flight situation and your adrenaline's up through the roof, you're going to focus on the thing that could potentially hurt you, right? You're not going to be looking at who's wielding it.
Right.
That's what you're going to end up remembering.
Right.
So, in court, eyewitness identification of a perp is incredibly powerful to a jury. So, like, with the exception of DNA evidence, nothing can be more damning for a defendant than somebody sitting there and saying, I saw him do it, and pointing.
Right.
It's too easy for like the identification to be mistaken. And police, whether they mean to or not, have a part in this as well. They can be suggestive when it comes to trying to find the person. And I read that like the lineups they're terrible. They're awful. You sometimes a police officer might inadvertently use subtle clues. So like pauses, hesitations, like smiles, gestures, and really anything, which subconsciously taints your judgment. So let's talk about Bruce Dallas Goodman. He's also served 18 years for a murder, rape, and kidnapping that he didn't do. This one's pretty brutal. So this happened in 1984 on the morning of November 30th. The body of 21-year-old Sherry Ann Fales Williams was found near a freeway off-ramp north of Beaver, Utah. So she was bound at the knees and wrists. She was nude below the waist except for socks. An autopsy showed that she suffered at least 8 blows to the head. She also had what appeared to be defensive wounds on her hands, and she had been sodomized with a blunt instrument. So this is a brutal crime. The police determined that she had met 34-year-old Bruce Goodman at the Arizona State Fair in October of 1984, and that they had moved to a hotel in Las Vegas. And at the time, Goodman was working at a ranch near the city. So 11 days before her death, she breaks up with Goodman and decides to reunite with her estranged husband. That same day, Goodman asks to borrow a truck from his employer, and he's saying that he needed it to move his personal belongings, stuff like that. So he was eventually arrested on a traffic violation in December, about a month after she was found in Texas. So he voluntarily was like, yeah, I'll go back to Utah if you guys want to question me. He totally agreed to it. He denied involvement in the murder. He said he locked the keys of the truck and left it in a truck stop parking lot the same day that he borrowed it. But a truck stop worker said that it wasn't there until he found it shortly after midnight on the same day that Williams's body was found. So Bruce Dallas Goodman was charged with the murder in December of 1984 and went on trial a couple years later in 1986. So at the trial, they showed a cigarette butt that was found near the body, and they had saliva on it from someone with blood type A and was a secretor. So they also said that Sherry Williams had sex with somebody who was a type A secretor 24 to 48 hours before her death. Goodman was a type A secretor, but so is 1/3 of the population.
Right. Very, very rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the jurors were told that the rope used to bind Sherry Williams was similar to the rope used on the ranch where Goodman worked. So this is also where more false eyewitness testimony comes in. So the eyewitnesses totally contradicted what Goodman had said. A gas station attendant said that he saw Goodman and Williams together in a truck 8 days before she was killed in Nevada. So there were 2 alleged sightings of Goodman and Williams together within 24 hours of the discovery of her body. So a truck stop cashier testified to seeing them arguing at around midnight on the night of November 29th. A casino worker said that Williams and Goodman were in the Peppermill Casino in Mesquite, Nevada between 2 and 4 a.m. on November 30th. So Goodman, like a couple of our other Innocence Project cases, this person had an alibi and they came to court and they showed. He said that he was in Stockton, California at the time of the murder. He presented 2 witnesses who said they were with him. They all testified. It didn't work. February 15th, 1986, he was convicted by a judge who actually heard the case without a jury, and he was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. 16 years later, 2002, he requested help from the Rocky Mountain Innocence Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. So lawyers there were like, let's do DNA testing. And a judge granted an order, and they allowed tests to be performed on the rape kit as well as the cigarette butt. And just like Gerard Richardson, they found a profile, but it totally excluded Goodman. They also looked at the rope. Further analysis showed that the weave of the fiber was totally different than any type of rope that was ever found on the ranch that Goodman worked in. So 2004, a couple years later, his conviction was vacated and the case was dismissed. He was released from prison, but he passed away almost exactly 10 years later.
Wow.
And the murder of Sherry Ann Fales Williams is still unsolved.
Right, of course. And probably didn't help that they had the wrong person in prison for over a decade.
Oh, my God.
Not looking for the real perpetrator.
That's the big thing. They think they've got it done and solved, but they don't.
Right, exactly. And that's why I think people can misinterpret these kind of efforts and these like really critical examinations of forensics as somehow being soft on crime or something. It's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
If you want to find the real perpetrator, the way in which you can guarantee you're not going to do that is by locking up the wrong person and closing the case and not investigating anymore.
Then that's it.
Right? It just makes me mad because people do not give enough credence to these types of things. And again, not to get too political, but we're in an environment right now where, if anything, we're going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Whereas with Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch at the helm of the Justice Department, at least there was at least that report from what was it, 2009?
Yes, 2009.
Yeah.
Well,
the FBI report was a few years later, but
I think the FBI report was in 2012. But
2012,
the National Academy of Sciences was in 2009.
Right, but I mean, who thinks that if Jeff Sessions were the Attorney General in 2012 that report would have come out? Not me. Would never have been created.
Oh God.
So these things matter, and they matter because we want to get justice for people.
Yeah.
And not have more people have injustices done to them, right?
But basically, just be skeptical when it comes to these type of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just hair analysis or bite mark analysis. It's
DNA too.
It's DNA, and we talked about this with the JonBenét Ramsey case, the touch DNA,
right?
How that's a problem,
right?
Anything that you can compare, even tire marks and stuff like that. And I also could have gone into arson investigations, fire pattern. That's not a thing. Blood spatter analysis. That's not a thing. It's
terrible.
Just, goodness.
Okay, so thanks so much for listening, you guys.
Thank you guys for listening.
And thank you for waiting on this episode. We really appreciate it.
Super appreciate it.
We will be better at doing it earlier. So even if something like this happens, we can get it out. We're committed to Wednesday. We've been committed to Wednesday for a year, pretty much. So we're sticking with Wednesday, but this
like you
week
said,
was an
nobody
Nobody's
bats
perfect.
100.
Nobody bats 100. So I did, and I don't have very much time, but I just really quickly wanted to do, because this was such a good story, and I sent it to you today, and it made me so happy. And if you guys haven't seen it, please look it up. Washington Post story by Michael Bryce Sadler. The headline is Patton Oswalt got into a Twitter war with a Trump supporter, then helped pay his medical bills.
What a guy.
Oh, my God. And please, if you can help this guy out, do. Because this guy needs some serious help. Name's Michael Beatty, or Beatty. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. 64-year-old Huntsville, Alabama resident. Very unfortunate circumstance.
Basically he did not take care of his diabetes.
Right.
Went into a coma.
Badly managed diabetes. He was dealing with sepsis and diabetic ketoacidosis. Terrible, terrible conditions. Had just gotten home from the hospital. Was super upset because all these people were saying bad stuff about the administration that he admires. Including Patton Oswalt, who's, very, very outspokenly liberal on Twitter. And so he fires off this message to Patton Oswalt, never thinking that anyone would see it, let alone Patton Oswalt. Patton Oswalt does see it. And he doesn't fire back with another fiery tweet. He looks into the guy's situation, sees that he's in this terrible situation, and directs all of his Twitter followers to go donate money so that his medical expenses can be. It's just so great.
It's because Patton Oswalt is a good person.
And that's the thing that I really loved from this.
And what I also admired about this,
can
Michael...
I just say the
Yes,
yeah,
go
thank
ahead.
you. I just really love this quote, so I just wanted to make sure to say it. This is the Michael Beatty guy. He says, okay, where is it? Okay, quote, "I'm having to reevaluate some of the things I've gone along with," he said. "The biggest thing I learned about Oswalt is that he is a man of character."
Right.
I just loved that. What were you going to say?
Basically that he was like re-looking and trying to figure out his mindset and stop judging people. And like, I think that's so important.
Awesome. So yeah, like find this guy's GoFundMe page, Michael Beatty, Beatty. Give him a couple of bucks if you can, because he needs it. I guess he said his cousin's having a hard time too. So people helping people. I just love it. That's what it's all about.
Yep.
So, yeah, thanks again for listening, guys. And we will be back at the regular time and slot next week.
Yeah, hit us up on Wednesdays. Woo!
Woo! And hit up our Insta.
Yeah, follow us on Twitter.
And if you noticed, I don't know if you follow our Twitter and our Facebook, we were talking about the delay. So if you're wondering, hey, where's the pod? Hey, what are they going to do next week? What are Mario and Chloe up to?
Get us on the social medias.
Look us up, because we are posting actively. So, and thanks you, Chloe, because Chloe's our social media manager. She does the yeoman's work on that. Okay.
Oh,
right. Okay. Bye.
Bye.